I always thought the worst thing about a first date was the silence. You know, that awkward pause when you've both discussed the weather, the latest news, and accidentally repeated the same joke from memes. But as it turns out, the silence was a godsend compared to what awaited me. Kevin, yes, let's call it Kevin because the name fits, and I corresponded for a couple of weeks. Light flirting, a couple of funny stories, not a single red flag. He knew how to write funny, didn't overdo it with compliments, and, most importantly, didn't give the feeling that he needed anyone, just so someone would respond. I even caught myself thinking that he was one of those rare men who understand that correspondence is not an interrogation or a monologue. There's a place downtown, he wrote one evening. Cozy, great coffee, not many people I think will like it. I was happy, to be honest. A first date in a cafe is a simple, safe idea. No pressure, you can leave at any time, and there is always the chance to say, "Oh, I have a meeting in an hour." We agreed on Saturday. That day, I arrived a little early. I like to be the first one there. It gives me the illusion of control. I chose a table by the window and ordered an iced latte to keep my hands and lips occupied until the social lottery began. When he walked in, I recognized him immediately. The same soft look as in the photo, the same light gait. But he was not alone. Next to him was a woman of about 55, in a beige coat and with such a posture that it seemed as if she were walking on a catwalk. The brain immediately started to run through the options. A sister? A colleague who needed a ride? A chance meeting at the entrance? But the answer was worse. "Hi." Kevin hugged me lightly, as if we already knew each other. "This is my mom. I thought she would like to meet me." I smiled, more out of inertia than genuine joy. "Oh, hello." I waited for him to add, "She was just passing by." But no mom sat down opposite me, carefully placing her bag next to me, and immediately, warmly, but without embarrassment, began, "So you are the girl Kevin is texting? I am very pleased to meet you. Tell me, what do you do?" An invisible switch clicked inside me. This was no accident. She was not here as a fellow traveler, but as an inspector, an observer, a member of the jury. I looked at Kevin. "She's staying for the whole date?" He nodded as if it were an obvious fact. "Yeah, we always do. That mom gives me a, what do you call it? Vibe check. Saves time." I almost choked on my latte. The first 10 minutes were like a strange dream. She asked me about my work, my hobbies, my attitude towards children, whether I believe in God, and what my zodiac sign is. All this with a soft smile, but with that same look in her eyes that says, "I'm taking notes." I knew I was being polite by nodding and answering, but inside I had a slow growing feeling that I was in for an interview. No one had warned me about. I remembered how, a couple of days ago in a chat with friends, we laughed at a video where a guy brought his friend on a date just in case. Then I said, "The main thing is that no one thinks to bring mum." And here I am. After another question about, "How many kids would you like to have?" Logically, I took a sip of coffee to buy myself some time. Kevin sat there, completely pleased with himself as the man who had invented the best way to filter girls. He didn't see the problem, and at that moment I realized that this date was no longer mine. It had become their little family ritual. And I was just another item in my mother's notebook. I sat there, pretending to be engaged in a normal conversation, but inside I was already plotting my escape. The question wasn't whether I would leave, but how to leave without looking like someone who had just jumped out of a burning building. "Do you even believe in horoscope compatibility?" Mom asked, leaning toward me as if we were discussing state secrets. Honestly, I took a sip of my latte to buy myself a few seconds. "Not really," she frowned. as if I'd just said I didn't like puppies, and Kevin is a Leo. That's important. Leos need special support, and she started listing something about charisma and leadership. But I stopped hearing the words. I just looked at Kevin. He sat there nodding to his mother, like a student who was listening to his teacher's favorite lecture for the 100th time. There was no awkwardness, no attempt to change the conversation to something neutral. You do realize this is unusual, right? I finally asked when Mom was briefly distracted by the waiter. Unusual? He even smiled. On the contrary, it's honest. You can tell right away who's suitable and who's not. Mom senses people. Mom senses people, I mentally added, and writes a dossier on them. The next 20 minutes were like a drawn-out interrogation with elements of small talk. She asked, "Do you have a stable job? What is your relationship with your parents? Would you be able to move to another city if Kevin's job required it?" Every time I tried to steer the topic in a different direction, say, asking Kevin about his job or hobbies, Mum would take over and interject with her own comments. "Oh, he had a girlfriend who didn't like dogs, and that ruined everything," she said, as if we were not on a first date but at a family reunion. Kevin just laughed. Mom's just worried. And then it dawned on me. He seemed to think it was romantic, like in the movie, where the parents help find the one. Only this movie is endless and has no script. I felt a strange mixture of irritation and fatigue growing in my chest. In the correspondence, he seemed like a man who valued personal boundaries. In reality, he brought a woman with him, who was ready to measure those boundaries with a ruler and report back to him. "Excuse me, can I ask you a question?" I finally said. Turning to my mother, "Do you always go on dates with him?" "Only for the first ones," she answered, proudly, as if it were a charity project. "I have to make sure the girl is good." Good. In her understanding, obviously meant suits her son according to the checklist. "What if she doesn't like it?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "That means she's not ready for a serious relationship," she said, without a shadow of a doubt. I nodded, although inside I was already seething. This was the moment when the puzzle came together. For them, this was not an experiment, not a fun tradition. It was a filter, and I had already failed the test. At some point, the waiter brought us the dessert they had ordered, one for both of us, for Kevin and his mum. And for some reason, that was the last straw. I was sitting across from a couple who were calmly eating cheesecake, exchanging inside jokes and discussing the next table, and I was the third wheel on my own date. The phone in my bag vibrated. My friend sent me a text. "So, how's your boyfriend doing? Are you already thinking about a second date?" I looked at the screen, then at them, and realized that this evening was heading straight into a collection of stories called "What the Hell Was That?" "Kevin," I began, "I think I'll be going." He raised his eyebrows, and his mother froze with her fork in her hand. Already. He looked surprised, as if he didn't understand why someone wouldn't listen to the rest of their family interview. "Yes." I stood up, took out my wallet and put money for the coffee in. "Thank you for meeting. You didn't even know what we had in store for the second half of the evening," he said, and there was not a drop of humor in his voice. "You know, I think the first one was enough for me." I smiled, but inside, I had only one desire: to go outside and breathe air without the smell of someone else's control. I stood there, my palm on the back of the chair, as if asking him for permission to leave. The cafe was noisy. Someone was laughing at the dessert display. The coffee machine was steaming. The barista was clinking a cup of ice. But our table suddenly found itself in a vacuum. The sounds seemed to recede, leaving only their gazes, equally surprised, equally sure that I would sit back down and give them a chance. "Wait," Kevin said, not even trying to get up. "This seems, well, abrupt. We're just getting started." We is him and his mother. I think I was an extra here. I leaned over and answered calmly. I appreciate the meeting, but for me, this is not the format. First dates are without audiences. Mum blinked and smiled in that educational tone that makes some people feel protected and makes others want to check for doors. I understand, dear. It's just that back in our days, everything was more serious. There's so much insecurity now, I'm protecting my son. There are different ways to protect. There are different boundaries, and mine have just been pushed aside with a chair. Protecting is about trust, I said, taking the bag. Good luck to both of you. I went to the cashier, paid for my iced latte, and only felt my pulse return when I got to the door. The street smelled of wet asphalt. There had been a short rain before the date, and now the sun was hiding behind the sign of the bakery across the street. I took a breath, like a person who had been released from a too-tight shirt. The phone vibrated in my hand. One message, then a second, then a third. I didn't look. I raised my hood and walked. Although I had planned to call a taxi, I wanted my legs to knock their voices, their vibe check, their mum feels people out of my head. At the traffic light, I finally pulled out my phone. The first one was from Kevin. Hey, that was unexpected. Could you at least explain? We just wanted honesty. Also next, and this is not an audience. Mom is always there for the important steps. If there was a problem with this, you could have said, in advance. I grinned. How could I have told you in advance about something I hadn't been warned about? I typed a reply, deleted it. Another one, also deleted. Sometimes the best response is short. I wrote, I warned you now, I'm not okay with it. Good luck. Period. Send a second later. There's a new call, but not from him. The number is unknown. Hello? This is Kevin's mum. You seem to have misunderstood. I'm not interfering. I'm just protecting my son from toxic people. Your leaving seemed immature, but if you want to meet again and talk calmly, I'm willing to give you a chance. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. People were passing me. The smell of sweet pastries from the display case hit me harder. Give me a chance. To me. From the mother of an adult man I was on my first date with. The main thing is to stay calm. I put the phone in my pocket and walked on. I'll come up with an answer later, when I can breathe without irony again. The road home was longer than usual. Home, not just in the sense of the address, home, to where the norms are by default. One table, two people, sometimes strange questions, sometimes funny failures, but definitely not a family meeting. I caught my reflection in the elevator. I looked like I'd just had a long shift. My hair was out of its ponytail. My gaze was that tired but holding on look. And then another one came from Kevin. Why so abruptly? Mom is just helping. You're not against support in a relationship, are you? It's about values. Support is when you are asked if you need it. When they first agree and do not present you with a fait accompli. I typed, support is when partners choose each other, not when one brings a third to appreciate the second. I sent it, and it became easier. Not easier, not more fun, just easier. The phrase found a form, the thought acquired boundaries. The door closed, and the silence of the apartment swallowed me like the sea. I took off my sneakers, threw off my jacket on the go and went to the kitchen, got a glass, poured water. My head was ringing, not from the coffee but from concentration. I sat down at the table and opened the chat with the girls. There was already a flickering light of unread messages. Masha, well, Prince? Sonia, I am writing to you publicly so that you do not erase the facts. Vika sent a gif of a man running with a sign that says, fire. I typed, he came to see his mother SMAMOY. 3 rights flashed simultaneously. Masha, lol, what? Sonia, please tell me she was just passing by. Me, no, she stayed and interviewed me for the position of wife number 1. Questions, children, religion, horoscope. Vika, I am not ready for this genre. Is this horror? Masha, this is a sitcom with a bad showrunner. Sonia, gone? Me, yes, I got up, paid, and left. He wrote that it was disrespectful. She wrote that she would give me a chance. At this point, the chat exploded. Stickers, laughter, indignation. When the noise died down, Masha wrote something that ingrained my feelings. You are not obligated to participate in someone else's ritual if you have not been warned about it. This is not about politeness. This is about consent. Sonia added, and about adulthood. An adult man has dates without a moderator. I leaned back in my chair. A simple thesis, almost banal, but sometimes banalities have to be said out loud for them to bring you peace. I was still angry, but this anger was even, not burning. It collected me, did not destroy me, and in this collectedness, I suddenly remembered one episode from our correspondence, which seemed cute then, and now a hint he once jokingly wrote, Mom always guesses who is right for me. She has a special sense. I put a smiley face without reading it properly. There it is, a red flag that passed by, because it was convenient to see humor in it. I opened his profile in the app, photos, with friends, with a dog, on a bike. Nothing criminal. But in one of the answers to the question, a perfect Sunday, he wrote, breakfast with the family, then a walk, a movie in the evening. There was no mum will go with us on all first dates. And this is an important distinction. Valuing family and dissolving personal boundaries in it are two different things. The phone beeped again. This time it was Kevin's voicemail. I clicked it to read the transcript without listening to his intonation. I really don't understand why you left. It's a tried and true method, it saves time. My ex was also upset at first, but then she realized how it works. Honestly, I'm disappointed in your reaction. You could have at least respected my mother. My mother, I caught myself counting. How many times in this message is there I, my, me, and not once? Are you okay? Defense that violates boundaries calls itself care. And in this equation, there is always a loser. The one who did not sign up. I typed a long reply, then I deleted it. Sometimes it's better to write short and forever than long and useless. Kevin, we have different ideas of what's normal. I'm not ready to discuss our compatibility with a third person, especially without warning. It's not my thing. Goodbye, sent blocked, no first, the silent mode. I'm not vindictive, I'm restrictive. I set boundaries where there are none. As I wrote, it grew dark outside. The rain returned, drumming on the windowsill as if someone had been typing too fast. I closed the curtains and took the remaining piece of lasagna out of the fridge. The mechanics of simple actions grounds you cut, you heat, you eat, and the world becomes three-dimensional again. During dinner, I found myself rehearsing the conversation in my head again, coming up with witty lines that I didn't say. It's a habit I'd like to unlearn. Winning an argument in your imagination doesn't change anything in reality. It does change one thing: decisions. I opened my notes and wrote myself 3 lines for later, as reminders. Consent is not only about the body, but also about the format. I choose which format is okay for me. Family values are cool, but if they replace personality, they are not values. They are a grid, red flags. Don't always scream. Sometimes they joke. I put a heart, not for him, but for myself. The phone lit up again. But it wasn't them, but the editor from the public page where I sometimes wrote short notes. Anything funny about dating? We need a text for tomorrow. I looked at my plate, at the warm kitchen, at the black screen of the window, and smiled. Funny is a flexible concept, but useful. It definitely exists. Working title, First Date for 3. Spoiler, I left. I'll send you a draft tomorrow morning. I sent it, and suddenly felt that the irritation that was cutting inside me had tired and subsided, not because I came up with the content from my personal experience, although that too, but because I found the meaning. I am not obliged to justify myself to the person who put me in a situation without a choice, but I can tell my version to those who will later find themselves in a similar situation and decide that I had to endure it. Nobody needs anything. Before going to bed, I opened the chat with the girls again. There were already links to articles about boundaries, memes, and one calm message from Vika. I'm proud of you for leaving. It's always harder than staying and being polite. I set the reaction to heart and wrote, I'm having wine on the weekend. I'll bring a case. How to distinguish family from a complete lack of separation. The laughter in response is the same one that drives away bad days. Finally, I turned off the light. Sometimes in the dark, everything magnifies, like in a magnifying glass, doubts, worries, other people's words. But today, the darkness was ordinary. No voices, no give me a chance, no mental questionnaires, just me, the cold city, and a thought that lay under my pillow like a flat stone from childhood. A first date is a meeting of two people. Period, anything bigger is a different genre. I fell asleep quickly, without the usual scrolling, and even when another long monologue from Kevin came at night, with reproaches, resentment, and that you could be smarter, the phone remained silent on the bedside table. Tomorrow, if I want, I'll read it most likely. No, the world will not collapse if one story remains. Without my commentary, the morning brought clarity. The kind that doesn't require coffee to get up. I opened my laptop and jotted down the first paragraphs of the text for the editor. Not bile, not mockery. An observation. How often do we agree to a little not okay because it's awkward to leave? How much do we endure for the sake of not offending, forgetting that we are offending ourselves? And how useful it is sometimes to get up, pay for your latte and go out into the rain, just to hear your own voice again. At that moment, I realized that the ending was still ahead. Not because the story would continue with Kevin. His part was over for me. But because every no thank you has its own side effect. You get your time back, and time is the best companion on real dates. On those where exactly one person sits next to you and asks not, what does your mother think of me, but how do you like it? With sugar or without? And I suddenly imagined it clearly. Another table, another person, no third shadow behind, someone who laughs, not where mom will like it, but where it's funny for both of us. And I realized that it's not hard to wait for this when you've learned to leave what doesn't suit you. The morning after that date turned out to be unexpectedly productive. I woke up without the usual feeling of, I urgently need to explain myself to the world, and immediately sat down to write a text for the editor. My fingers found the rhythm themselves, not sarcasm, but precision, not mockery, but contours. I wrote about consent as a format setting. Not only yes-no to the body, but also yes-no to the situation. About how being polite sometimes means betraying yourself. About how family values, without separation, are not about love, but about control with a soft smile. I called the article simply, First Date for 3. Spoiler, I left. An hour later, I sent a draft. 3 hours later, I received the editor's flying today at lunchtime, and by evening the phone was vibrating so often that I took it off silent a couple of times just to make sure it wasn't a fire alarm. The comments were varied. Heroine of the day. Some wrote, well, she could have sat for an hour out of respect. Others sighed. But most responded to the keynote. Thank you for calling a spade, I was leaving too. And I also thought it was impolite. I read these also and felt how a personal episode ceased to be a strange bacillus and became something understandable, almost a case study. A name I hadn't expected flashed through the notifications. Marina, a mutual friend of Kevin's from the running club. "Hey," she wrote. "I'm not sure if this is the same person, but one of my friends is right now in the chat, justifying why his mom is the best filter against toxicity." Sound familiar? I took a breath and exhaled slowly. "Yes, I know," I replied, "but I don't have public discussions with him. Let him practice in his chat." Marina clicked understood, and a minute later sent a second one. "If anything, next week we're going for a run and having coffee. Without moms. Come." I smiled. Simple invitations are like bread after a long journey. In the evening, my mother called my real one, not the date moderator. "Do you live there?" In her voice was the same caution that I was taught since childhood, not to comment on other people's families and not to cure other people's habits. I briefly retold it. My mother chuckled. "When a man takes his mother on a first date, these are two diagnoses. He has problems with separation and with respect for his partner. 2, don't waste tenderness on this." Sometimes her specificity was the best medicine. The next day, the text reached a different audience. A friend posted the link to a women's chat in a neighboring area. There, an argument erupted, and I received a dozen stories in my personal messages. One girl told how her boyfriend brought her best friend, an expert in psychology. It turned out to be the Psychology in 10 Days course on Instagram. Another told how she was gently tested on a date for readiness to give birth in the next year. A third told how she was given a blitz of correct answers to a video lesson by a mother candidate I read and thought, it's incredible how often the word care disguises an attempt by the authorities. And then something happened that I kind of expected but hoped would pass me by, a message from an unfamiliar account with a neutral avatar. "Can I call?" "This is about a recent publication," I replied. Better in text. In response, a long canvas of speech, and even without an introduction, it was clear. "Kevin, it's a shame that you brought a private incident into the public space. It affected my reputation, although you didn't name a name. People can guess. And in general, your departure was disrespectful to my mother. But I am generous and ready to discuss this calmly if you admit." Then came a mixture of complaints, life lessons, and that same "could have been smarter." I reread it twice, decided not to fall into a long set trap, and wrote briefly, "The text is about me and my choice. You are not named in it. I do not consider it useful to continue the discussion. Please do not write anymore." And I turned on the contact restriction doctors recommend for healthy boundaries to dose the access of toxins. A couple of days later, I received another attempt to get around the door. A voicemail from his mother, but this time as a woman-to-woman message. The transcript read, "I understand that you young people see things differently, but you should also understand I am his mother. I am obliged to check. You have shown impulsiveness, but if you want to apologize, I am ready to talk." I sat down, put my elbows on the table and slowly stirred my tea. An incredible formulation. Ready to talk. As if an inspector with a clearance stamp was standing at my door, I answered her with a single sentence. "You are the mother of an adult man, and I am not your project. I wish you luck, but there is no place for you in my life." Sent blocked, and for the first time in these days, I felt clean air, undiluted with calm. While the internet was arguing, offline was going on as usual, I wrote 2 more short notes. One about micro-violations, being interrupted and called bunny, even though you introduced yourself by name, and one about watches on first dates. Friends, neighbors, random colleagues. The editors took both. The co-founder wrote, "Sometimes one honest text is enough for people to stop making excuses for leaving." I saved it to my favorites, usually for a rainy day. On Saturday, I finally showed up for that run. It was cool, cars were shining through the fog, and people in leggings and hoodies looked like identical moving clouds. At the finish line, we were met by coffee from a thermos and steam that mixed with the morning air. "This is Dima." Marina introduced the guy in the blue hat. "He sometimes writes stupid things in the general chat, but in person, he's adequate." Dima chuckled. "I once wrote something stupid, and it was remembered forever." He had funny gloves with cut-off fingers and an "I won't climb" smile. We stood there, elbows resting on the embankment railing, talking about roots, about sneakers, and about how November always smells like damp paper. "I heard you were writing," he said, as I tucked my phone into my sleeve. "About dates, too?" "Sometimes," I answered. "Not as a judge. More like a person who also has not okay moments." "That sounds like something I'd read," he smiled, "and something I wouldn't want to end up in your text." "It's not a threat." I smiled too. "My texts include those who don't ask, 'Are you okay?'" He nodded, and that nod was better than any assurance. "No, but my mother thinks so. No, that's how we do it. Just, do you want some water? And let's go slower next time. I get out of breath on the climb." We parted without pathos. He took my number. Not like in saccharine movies. Without fanfare, without "it's fate," simply, "If this week you are near that coffee shop where they have normal croissants, tell me, I'll come alone." I nodded, and, leaving, caught myself in a stupid teenage lightness. Sometimes one phrase, "alone," is enough to turn off the alarm clock in your head. In the evening, I sent the editor the promised second text, and before going to bed, I sent a message to the girls. "I owe you wine and pie, but I warn you, I have a new mantra. We don't have to. Get ready to argue." Masha put the fire on. Sonia, the falling man. Vika sent a photo of a cat with a sign, "No is also a suggestion." We laughed until our eyes began to close on their own. A few more days passed. Sometimes echoes of that story appeared on the horizon. A friend sent a screenshot from a chat where they discussed modern girls without respect for elders. Sometimes in the comments to my text came another, "Well, you just don't know how hard it is for a man to find a good one." I did not argue. It is impossible to convince someone who holds the microphone like a baton. But you can build your own scenes with different rules. Our coffee with Dima was drama-free. We sat by the window, each with his own cup, his own words, his own pauses. No shadows behind us, no one's breath on our necks. He told me how he once stayed at "not okay" so as not to seem difficult, and then realized that this "not okay" only makes it difficult for you. We laughed at awkward stories, competed to see who would tell the most cringeworthy twist. When he suggested going for a walk, he asked if it was okay for me to walk without gloves. Because I have a habit of gesticulating, and sometimes I can accidentally touch someone. This little thing ended my internal argument once and for all. Respect is not seen in a record of values, but in micro movements. Returning home, I remembered my mother's phrase, "Don't waste tenderness on something that eats it with spoons and doesn't chew it." The world didn't become more perfect in a week, but I became more specific, and this specificity contained everything at once: the right to leave, and the right to stay, and the right to start over without looking back at other people's manuals. That evening, I opened my notes again and added a fourth point to my mini-manifesto. I don't have to justify no, but if I explain, I do it for myself, so I can remember how my voice sounds. I could have put a period here, a nice, round one. But life loves epilogues. A couple of weeks later, I received a letter, without a name, from the official domain of the cafe. You left a review that you felt uncomfortable with, the presence of third parties on a date. We will introduce a rule. If 3 people come to a table for 2, The barista will check if this is okay for both guests. I laughed out loud. Barista is the new ethics committee. But I put thank you small rules. Sometimes change big habits. And then Dima wrote to me, I've been thinking about what to call it when you leave on time. Any suggestions? I replied, hygiene. He sent me a smiley with soap. I liked both the word and the smiley. That night, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time because of the pleasant emptiness in my head. Where the lines usually roam, only warm pictures remained. A treadmill in the park, a mug on the table, my notes with neat points. I thought about the girls from the PM, about other people's too, and how sometimes you want to be polite to the last, just so that no one gets offended. And how freedom often begins with a strange gesture. Get up, pay for your latte, put on your hood, and go out, without slamming the door, just closing it carefully behind you. When people ask me how that story ended, I answer simply, nothing. It didn't turn into a battle. It didn't become a story of revenge. It didn't break up into loud scandals. It ended where it should have started, with a date for two. With someone who asks, are you okay with this? And doesn't quote the family charter. Sometimes the best endings look modest. No fanfare, just silence that doesn't press but breathes. I turned off the lamp, and the darkness lay softly like a blanket. On the nightstand lay a phone, a book, and a note to myself. I am not someone's test. I am my choice. I smiled. To myself, not to the mirror. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that I didn't expect a catch from the next morning. Tomorrow there would be coffee, running, and maybe another date. Just for two, only by agreement. And I no longer needed any vibe check except my own.